This morning, the Minority Women's Caucus in Parliament paid a visit to NDC running mate, Professor Naana Opoku-Agyeman. Parliamentary correspondent Joseph Opoku was with them. He will join us shortly. First, though, listen to Professor Naana Opoku-Agyeman.
My daughters, I think most of you, my sisters, my friends, my sons, we don't go without you. You are all part of this. When we talk about the youth, we are talking about the men and the women. The time will come for me to make my maiden statement, and then maybe we'll all have a sense of where we are coming from. Today, I will not go ahead of myself. I just want to thank you, and I want to recognize the work you do. The minority in Parliament is like the minority of the minority, and yet look at what they do. They get those done because they are women. The women organizer and her group in the regions, in the districts, right down to the branches, and even further down. We know the work they do. We want to encourage them to do more. I have the enthusiasm that has greeted the decision of His Excellency John Dramani Mahama. Yes, it's not lost on any of us. I urge that we turn that enthusiasm into reality. And we all know we can.
We can.
Yes, we can. Yes. Our Kaya have bothered to come. Where are they? I want them to come and stand by me. Please let us socially distance. I have called you, not because I don't like the others. No. We understand, Mommy. Thank you very much. I want you to know that you have proper names. Your name is not Kayela. You have proper names. You deserve the respect like everybody else. Don't allow anyone to disrespect you. That's all I want you to say. Without you, our society will not be what it is. Believe that whatever you are doing in whatever category is as important as at any level. So I just want to tell you, thank you very much. Be confident in yourself. If you didn't get there, make sure your children do. Thank you very much.
So let's go to my colleague Joseph Opoku-Agyeman, who was with the at that event earlier today. Joseph joins us via Zoom. Hello, Joseph. How are you? Good to see you again. Joseph, you would have to unmute your audio.
That is always a big deal.
There's always a technical challenge when it comes to these things. But tell us, Professor Naana Opoku-Agyeman, she's not been outdoored yet, and yet the Parliamentary Minority Women's Caucus decided to, hold this event. What was the purpose of the event?
And so it was a courtesy call on her to congratulate her on her appointment and nomination as the NDC's running mate going into the 2020 elections. And so just to tell you a bit of the backstory in relation to that, at a point in time, there was the contemplation as to whether the media should actually be allowed in to the conversation because they were hesitant about her saying anything publicly when she's not exactly been outdoored. But essentially, the Minority Women Caucus in Parliament, led by Comfort Doyle, who is actually the MP for Ada, as well as the NDC women organizers from the various regions, led by Dr. Hannah Bisil, who is the National Women's Organizer, and a number of other women, including the KIAs, as well as female parliamentary candidates, including that of the Ketu South, as well as a number of others, including Dr. Zanetta Rawlings, who's actually the MP for Clotikole, were all part of the delegation that paid a courtesy on her, essentially to congratulate her and to assure her that she can count on their support, even as she partners John Mahama for the 2020 elections.
Joseph, there's one thing which caught my attention that she said. She said that the headquarters that we know as KIA should not be referred to as KIA. Did she explain why?
Well, essentially, she was asking them to step up and demand the respect that's due them. She makes the point that she thinks they have names that they can be called instead of them being referred to as far as their profession is concerned. And to a certain extent, she appears to be convinced that referring to them as Kayayes is not exactly a good thing, and that they are ordinary members of the society who have names, and that it would be good for them to be called by the names that they actually know. They had their own thoughts as well, even after she was actually called in by Professor Naana Opoku-Agyeman, and they were told to step up and defend themselves and all. You recall that there had been an issue with them being referred to in comments by the NPP General Secretary John Boadu, and him making the point that Professor Naana Opoku-Agyeman is so unpopular that when she steps out there, these are the only people who would actually wave at her, the Kayayes, I mean. They had some responses to that even after they met Professor Naana Opoku-Agyeman, indicating that this particular comment is actually encouraging them as women who are headquarters to really, really support Professor Opoku-Agyeman's candidature and campaign for her and ensure that she becomes vice president of the country so she can help them deal with issues having to do with loans that they need to set up businesses and also support them properly with their children's education and all. But in some way, they've also been demanding an apology from John Boadu as far as those comments are concerned. And a number of the women who are here in Parliament who were part of that meeting actually support the demand for an apology. And in fact, soon after the meeting with Professor Naana Opoku-Agyeman, Dr. Hannah Bisiu, who is the NDC Women's Organizer, addressed the media briefing at which she took on a number of the NPP figures who've been criticizing the nomination of Professor Naana Opoku-Agyeman and insisting that women deserve a lot more respect. And for her, the NPP is panicking following the nomination of Professor Naana Opoku-Agyeman. And in her words, they haven't seen the worst of the panic yet because they are convinced she will lead them to victory and become vice president of the country. And that's how come she thinks the NPP is not happy with her nomination, including her criticizing the majority leader, that Osei-Kyei Mensah-Bonsu and all.
Right. And Joseph, we do know that you're still in Parliament. What issues have come up for discussion on the floor?
Let me begin with what's been happening on the floor, and then we discuss what's been happening right on the precinct and what other MPs have been saying. On the floor, there was a statement from Osei-Kyei Mensah-Bonsu, the majority leader, on issues having to do with what is called Private Members Bill. As it exists today, the only legislation that's brought to Parliament for approval, and even when it comes to amendment of the Constitution and all, solely has to do with things that the executive arm actually brings to Parliament and laid on the floor by one minister or the other. But there's been a push by Professor Michael Quay to ensure that MPs can introduce legislation that can eventually become law in the country on their own without it coming from the executive arm of government. And so the majority leader indicated that the work to ensure that has progressed very steadily, and that there's been a reference to the Constitutional and Legal Affairs Committee to draw out modalities that will ensure that sometime soon, even before this particular 7th Parliament comes to an end, we can see a situation where an individual MP can introduce a bill to Parliament, get it approved, and it becoming law without what we've seen over the years, with no MP doing that apart from legislation that's only introduced by the executive arm of government. And that announcement by the majority leader actually drew a lot of comments from both the majority and the minority, who think that it's about time that MPs are able to introduce bills which would eventually become law. So that's what the House has been debating. A while ago, MPs were called back in after like a 2-hour break because they need to deal with the lands bill and get it approved. On the presence of Parliament, there's been reactions to, if you recall, the laying out of the details of why the Supreme Court judges decided to dismiss the NDC's case against the Electoral Commission sometime last month, and the Supreme Court indicating that they think that the birth certificate cannot be used as a document for identification. Well, lawyer Roxin Nafiamakbo, who is a member of the Constitutional and Legal Affairs Committee of Parliament and also the MP for South Dai, thinks that looking at the details of the judgment, the reasoning of the judges is actually something that he says is shallow. He thinks they are wrong. He thinks they've erred. And he makes the point that from time immemorial, the birth certificate has been a document for identification. And so he thinks that it's out of place, that the court is now coming to the conclusion that it can be used as a form of identification, because it would have a lot of consequences, looking at the fact that people have acquired their passports with their birth certificate and a number of other documents with their birth certificates.
All right, Joseph, thank you very much for that update on what's happening on the floor of Parliament, as well as the precincts of Parliament.